one of the building blocks, the renovation wave that has been adopted just a few weeks ago, and also say a bit more about critical success factors to make it happen on the ground. So first of all, you should know that every 5 years in Europe, the political cards are reshuffled. And 2019 was the year of transition. We had elections in May for the European Parliament. 750 members from all over the 28 member states were elected. They come together in one parliament and they form a number of transnational political groups. Not only two like in the US, but where you have Democrats and Republicans, but many more. And so we ended up with a very fragmented parliament when no single party has a majority. And this means that coalition building, compromise making is a key issue if you want to do politics in Europe. And at that point in time, in parallel was also a battle between the institutions. You have the parliament that wanted to put forward its own candidate, Commission President for the next 5 years. Commission President is basically the head of the executive. And on the other hand, the member states that wanted to, take control of this process. And I'm not going to go into too many details, but at the end of the day, Ursula von der Leyen became the new president. She needed confirmation by the European Parliament, though. And to make that happen, she needed to negotiate on content. And since you have different groups, Social Democrats, you could call it the left politicians, and Greens, together with liberals, but also conservatives, all wanted to develop a Green Deal agenda. Some were more ambitious than others, but ultimately what happened is that it became a key priority. The Commission started at the end of the year, and on the 19th of December last year, the European Green Deal was presented. Here you see actually that, of course, European politics is about much more than the European Green Deal. But what is important is that the European Green Deal has been positioned as the EU's flagship initiative for the next 5 years, around which the other strategies, including economic strategies, digitization, our place in the world, the global dimension, etc. The other strategies have to be developed, structurally embedded in everything. I mean, the Green Deal has to be structurally embedded in everything we do, so throughout all these other strategies as well. It also means that the Green Deal is about much more than climate. It's also about co-benefits in terms of competitiveness for the European economy, about innovation, about health also, and so on. In other words, it has been positioned as Europe's new growth strategy. And of course, we know that over time, unexpected events may disrupt the political agenda. I mean, that happened also, let's say, 5-6 years ago, during the last political cycle. After that we were confronted with a number of issues we didn't know about before. I mean, referring to the refugee crisis that Europe had to manage, the terrorist attacks, the rise of populism in Europe and outside of Europe. You are also confronted with that in the US. We had a huge economic crisis as well. And the same happens, of course, today. Back in 2019, when the Green Deal was adopted, nobody knew about the coronavirus, and here we are. And it will certainly have an impact on the short-term priorities. But what was important is that all policymakers realized that climate started to become a real issue amongst voters. People in Europe, as you can see from this slide where I show, let's say, the evolution of what people think in Europe is important over the last couple of years. You see that climate suddenly in 2019 came second. Of course, we should add that probably if you would ask people today, what is the most single issue, people would say health or economy. But climate will stay as a key issue also in the years to come. So people want it basically, and also expert. If you ask scientists, what are the biggest issues that we need to care about? You know, climate and everything related to that is coming to the top of mind. Here you see a nice overview of what a wide range of experts think are the biggest risks in terms of likelihood, as well as in terms of impact. And you see that extreme weather events, climate action failure, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, and so on, water crises, are coming back over and over again. And these are all linked to this climate dimension. And what you see here in this slide is that, and policymakers are increasingly aware of that, is that these issues, these challenges are actually very much interlinked. A failure to address climate change, of course, results in global warming, we know that, and to extreme weather events. Extreme weather events can lead to water crises, and that can result in a food crisis. And this results in migration and social instability and maybe international crises as well. And so this means that as policymakers, we need to have this holistic view of the issues and really understand how they actually are linked with each other and how to address them all together. On this slide, you see where we are, the projections. They are not good. I mean, this is in temperature in Celsius, because that's what I found. That's what we use in Europe. But you know that according to the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement, we all agreed that we should limit the rise of the temperature by 2 degrees Celsius, meaning about 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe, compared to pre-industrial levels. But if we would follow current policies, the temperature would rise up to 3 degrees Celsius, way above what is needed, and this will have huge repercussions. So there is an urgency there. But coming back to what are the topics, it's not only about reducing emissions. The real challenge is actually, and I like this framework very much, it's from Professor Kate Raworth. Some of you may have heard about it, the donut framework, which basically says that, yes, of course, on the one hand, we should address climate challenge, but it's about much more. There are other issues like air pollution, biodiversity loss, and so on. We cannot go beyond the ecological ceiling with our economic system, the way we develop our society. But on the other hand, we should also lay strong foundations so that our people have access to good healthcare, to good education, to food, water, energy, and so on. So we need to find the right balance and stay, let's say, in this light green zone, the safe and just space for humanity. And that's very difficult because what you can see here on the left side, on this other framework, which is actually a translation of what I explained just now, what you can see here is that on the Human Development Index, the more you go to the right, we, Europeans and the United States and some other developed countries are very, very much to the right and have been able to develop a society and an economy with a very high human development. But we did it by exceeding the planetary boundaries, what you see if you go upwards. And so what we need to do is to combine the both, to get in this green zone, have a good human development, but also at the same time do it with respect of the planetary boundaries. And this, of course, requires a kind of a new type of economy, taking into account climate, but also other issues such as resource efficiency, what we call in Europe circular economy. And we need to do this in a world that is changing rapidly. We all know that the global economy is shifting eastwards. We see the Asian countries coming up very rapidly. At the same time, the international situation is very complex. Trade and technology becomes geopolitical. There are a lot of fights ongoing. And, and also a third big issue I should mention are the demographic trends. You know, in Africa alone, we expect the population to double by 2050 and to be multiplied by 4 by the end of this century. So it's a huge challenge to feed all these people, to allow them also to develop and to have access to a lot of goods and services that we have in Europe and the United States. How are we going to do this? And at the same time, keep, let's say, our planet safe for future generation. That is really a big challenge altogether. So the big question is how to do it. Well, I think this framework that I use from the European Environment Agency tells it all. Actually, what needs to happen is that we need to transform the key systems that define the way we live, define the way we work, define the way we produce, define the way we consume. These are complex systems. They are, you know, designed with a lot of instruments that you can see. They depend on values and on knowledge, on the way we behave, on the policy instruments that are being put in place, and they need to shift. And that is what you see on this slide, which looks complex, but I can quickly help you to understand. Basically, what it says is that all of these systems separately, like for instance the energy system or the mobility system, is kind of locked in a certain unsustainable regime. That's what you see in the middle. Why is it blocked? Because, you know, people have their own habits. Investments are geared towards what today is profitable. Policy frameworks are designed to support the incumbents, and so on and so on. And that's why it's very difficult to kind of lift these systems up to a more sustainable level. But what can change a system and put it on a sustainable track is are like niche innovations, fresh ideas, new visions that slowly but surely can disrupt the current regime, adjust it so that it comes into a new reconfiguration, a more sustainable one. And that is what we need to achieve. And we can, of course, as policymakers, contribute to that. There is no silver bullet. We will have to activate a wide range of policy tools to get there. First, we need to give it a little push through this niche innovation. So that's why innovation policies are crucial. We need to promote experiments, support new ideas, new entrants, and so on. Then comes the next phase, which is to diffuse this innovation that you can do through environmental policies, industrial policies that can scale up innovations, fiscal policies that can push the right issues. And finally, you come into the reconfiguration and come into kind of new stable situation that is more sustainable. And to make sure that this works, you need to make sure that everybody gets on board. And this you do through your education system, through welfare policies. You need to reskill people, and so on, so that people feel comfortable with tomorrow's world. And how is this being translated into the European Commission European Green Deal? Well, if you read the text, it's an impressive number of policy measures that have been announced back in December 2019. And here you can see basically what are the key building blocks highlighted in blue. It's about energy, it's about developing a circular economy, it's of course about mobility and transport, about another type of food system, about pollution, and so on and so on. What I'm going to do is not to go into details of all of this, but I I take two key issues as an example. First of all, increasing the EU's climate ambition for, before that, maybe just say to you that already a lot has been done. Yes, that's important. I mentioned the December 29 Green Deal, but ever since, let's say almost every month, new initiatives, part of this Green Deal, all building blocks have been adopted. Most of them are strategies underpinned with a lot of actions in the form of new legislation, investments, instruments, or innovation policies that have been announced. So that's what you see here. A just transition mechanism, European climate law, industrial strategy, circular economy action plan in March. In May, there was a farm to fork strategy on food system, biodiversity strategy. In July, on hydrogen, on energy system integration, and just in September, a new 2030 climate target plan, what I'm gonna speak about just in a second. The renovation wave, the second example I wanna mention later on, and so on and so on. And we expect later this year a sustainable smart mobility strategy and a new sustainable finance strategy. That's upcoming. So coming back to the 2030 strategy, of course, if we want to be climate neutral, that's the ambition for the long term. By 2050, we will have to accelerate in the short term, because otherwise we will not get there. And that's here the discussion that is ongoing. You see that we achieved already a 23% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990. That's good already, but we need to get to 100% almost. So what does it mean? Well, currently what's on the agenda is to try to achieve a minus 55% reduction by 2030. That's what you see here. This is the most ambitious proposal that's on this slide. And you see the trajectory. It's quite a steep line downwards. So it means that a lot will have to happen in order to get there. Now, the decision to move towards minus 55% compared to the current already agreed target of minus 40%, this decision will be made this year, probably in December. The Commission proposes minus 55%. The Parliament wants even minus 60%, and now it's in the hand of member states. And I believe that we will be close to this minus 55%. Without going into too much technicalities, I think it's nevertheless important to share with you some of the basics, because one thing is to agree on a new target, another is to put measures into place to get there. And this means that the mechanics put in place to decarbonize our economy need also to be adapted. And this is planned for the next year. So you will see next year a lot of new proposals to match basically the new ambition. And one big tool designed to reach already today the minus 40% I spoke about is the emission trading scheme. It's a market-based carbon trade mechanism that covers all industrial players and electricity plants in the EU. And all these players together will have to reduce their emissions by minus 43% by 2030 to reach the minus 40% I spoke about that is currently decided. For all the, and basically maybe I should add that basically how the system works is that a number of permits to emit carbon are gradually decreasing, causing a kind of a scarcity of permits and a rise in the carbon price. That's basically the mechanism that has been put in place. And those players, those industries, those factories, let's say those companies that are able to reduce their emission by investing in technologies can sell their permits they don't need anymore to competitors. So that's how it works. And next to this emission trading scheme, you have all the other sectors that are not covered. Agriculture, transport, buildings, waste, small and medium enterprises, they need to reduce their emissions as well. They need to reduce it by 30%. And for this, each member states need to develop a wide range of own measures to get there. But of course, these measures are also influenced by EU policy. If we put standards on emissions for cars, it can help member states to reach the target. But again, this may become history, because what we are discussing now is not only to reduce by 40%, by 55%. So this will have to be adapted as well, and it will imply a lot of discussions. Coming to the second example, this is a very concrete thing: buildings. Buildings are important because they are responsible for about 40% of the total EU's total energy consumption, 36% of its emissions. And we all know that modern new buildings consume much less, half of the energy to similar buildings 20 years ago. We also know that a lot of the buildings, especially in Europe, are very old. So we need to renovate them so that they become climate compatible, basically. And there's a lot of room for maneuver there, but we need a lot of money to get there. Here you see the renovation wave that support this, the policies around buildings, with 3 focus areas that the Commission want to address: public buildings, the worst performing buildings, and decarbonizing heating. But actually, what will be done throughout the next few years will be a lot of things that have been announced in this renovation wave to address also barriers. Many people hesitate to invest in their homes because of a number of barriers, because they don't find the money to invest, or because sometimes there are split incentives between landlords and tenants, or people don't know about the advantages, the return on investments. If you renovate your home and you insulate your home much better, you pay less for your energy. This needs to be explained. People need to be helped. They need to work together with their neighbors. So there are a lot of things that Europe can do actually to accompany this. Coming back to the Green Deal as such, I mentioned the blue highlighted issues that are the building blocks, basically. But what is also important is that there are also a number of success factors that need to be addressed, issues that we need to look into in order to make the Green Deal a real success. And these are not so easy to address. First of all, you need a lot of money. And for this, the European Commission has launched what we call a Sustainable Europe Investment Plan back in January already, committing itself to mainstream a lot of its budget towards climate issues. But also we agreed that the European Investment Bank, which is kind of a public bank owned by the European Union and all the member states, that it should focus itself to supporting the transition, meaning it will come up with new innovative financial instruments that help also private players to come on board by de-risking. It will give loans, for big projects and so on. Next to, let's say, the European level, you also need to have the member states and the regions and the cities on board. And for this, let's say, the way the European Union will assess member states' performance will include this Green Deal dimension. And of course, the private sector will have to come on board as well. I'm coming back to that in a second. And what is maybe even more important is that we need to make sure that on the ground project, get started, that we develop a good pipeline of real nice Green Deal projects. And for this, maybe we need to, invest much more in assisting authorities, local authorities, or investors in how they can be helped, and so on. There are many things that can be done. Coming back to the private sector, basically what we need to do is to rethink the financial system, because it will be crucial to reorient all these trillions of euros and dollars into things that matter for the future. And here you see a nice slide showing all the different actors throughout the finance value chain. Well, each of them need to be geared towards sustainable development in one way or another. And that's what the sustainable finance agenda is about. By kind of changing, adapting the regulations, we are able to to trigger, let's say, some change. For instance, by making climate risks visible. Big investors may think twice before investing in an oil company, for instance, because it entails a lot of risks and also the possibility of stranded assets. Making this visible will be key. Also forcing, let's say, boards of companies to discuss environmental and social considerations in how they operate is also a key element. And there are regulatory tools to get these things done. And we can go more into details if you're interested. A second point is that we need to kind of find a solution to the difficulty we have to convince old people. We have, of course, the front runners, like Greta Thunberg and many young people who want to have a very ambitious climate policy. And then you have those who are hesitating, who are protesting, because climate measures can have a significant distributional impact. And this needs to be factored in the design of policies. We need to find ways to bring people on board and to explain them that it's about a good and positive future, and that it can be made a fair transition, so that everybody is on board. Because we all know not everybody can afford a Tesla. Not everybody can afford buying solar panels. So how to address this key issue? And then, of course, at a more higher level, we will need to address the regions that need to transform themselves. Former coal mine regions or energy-intensive industrial regions, and so on and so on. And then we need to reskill them and find alternative development strategies. So that's a concern. The European Climate Pact, that's another thing. Building on what I just said, we can only be successful if everybody gets on board, and therefore you need to support bottom-up initiatives. You need to support the cities that can actually make the difference in your own neighborhood. And the Commission will come forward with what we call a climate pact in December, with a lot of initiatives supporting bottom-up action, and also develop networking platforms so that they can communicate with each other, exchange good practices, learn from each other, and so on. I just want to add that, of course, the individual consumption is a key element, is an elephant in the room, as we say, and need to be addressed. We all know that the way we eat, the way we move ourselves and goods, where we live, has an impact on our footprint, and we need to be aware of that and also try to change that. Almost at the end of my presentation, I mentioned also the importance of research and innovation, but I also want to emphasize that not all innovations lead automatically to sustainable outcomes. We have just released a new €1 billion package to support Green Deal innovation. That's good, and much more money is expected to be made available in the next few years by the European Union. But some innovations may have unintended consequences. Firstly, because the more innovative and wealthy an economy becomes, the more economic obsolescence accelerates, the more resources are consumed, the more waste is generated. Sometimes new business models can have unintended consequences. Think of ride-sharing apps that may actually lead to a rise in overall mileage, or home-sharing platforms that can create upward pressures on housing costs in certain areas. Not saying that we need to slow down these innovations, but that we need to be aware that they can be unsustainable, and that we maybe, as policymakers, need to think more in terms of what do we want to achieve. And that's why we are going to develop a more mission-oriented innovation to solve some key pressing challenges, focus our money on that, bring together engineers and academics to solve them. And as you can see from this list, 4 out of the 5 issues that have been identified for the mission innovation in the years to come in Europe are actually very closely linked to the European Green Deal, except cancer, which is an important issue as well. The other things are about climate change adaptation, about climate neutral cities, about the food system, for instance. The final point I want to make is that is a global dimension that is crucial. We all know that addressing climate change requires a concerted global effort. Some economies like ours have achieved high standards of living, have the resources to invest in clean technologies. We have, to a large extent, shifted to low carbon and service sector activities. And this means that we have also shifted over time emission intensive production to developing countries and emerging regions. So a lot of the emissions actually are embodied in the products we consume here, but were produced elsewhere. And so that's why, of course, knowing this, it should trigger a discussion about how are we going to bring also all the other countries on board. In this slide, you can see that China and India actually produce the carbon intensive products for consumption by Americans and Europeans. And so we will have to use a wide variety of diplomatic and economic tools to bring everybody on the same page. And we will have to use carrots and sticks. Carrot because we need to help other countries to leapfrog over polluting infrastructure to develop sustainably and skip some of the stupid things we did in the past and use clean energy from the onset. But maybe we'll also have to develop kind of stick approach in our trade policies and, help others or try to convince others also to make sustainable products and services to avoid, carbon leakage, be tough for ourselves, whilst the others are producing carbon intensive products is not good and will not be sustainable, and people will oppose it here in Europe and in America. So coming to my conclusions, the EU wants to be climate neutral by 2050. That's the key kind of target. The Green Deal is the EU's flagship initiative, meaning this is actually the key, key political priority for the coming years. That also is integrated throughout all the other issues that we will have to address. It's not only about reducing emissions, it's actually about transforming the economy and society, about drastically changing the way we work, we live, produce and consume. And of course, it's without saying, it cannot be a top-down operation. It will have to be a multi-level thing where everybody is kind of involved from the local cities and the citizens living there up to the European level, but also including, of course, the businesses, the academic world, and so on and so on. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to to respond to some of your questions.
Beautiful. Thank you, Saeed. Excellent talk. Excellent. I love the graphics. They were very telling and very helpful throughout the talk. Now we'd like to open the floor up to questions. We do have the chat box where if you feel more comfortable, you're welcome to just write in your questions. Otherwise, I would be glad to call on people. If you do in chat, just let me know that you have a question. Initially, right away, Saeed, we have a question from Don Smith, who is a professor of law at Sturm School of Law at a College of Law at the University of Denver. And Don actually leads, along with 2 other professors, one from Copenhagen and one from Oslo, a class that is entitled Transatlantic University Collaboration on Energy Law, Climate Change and Energy Law. So Noah, would you please unmute Professor Smith? And Don, would you like to ask your question, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. I'm wondering, how is the Commission and the Parliament and the Council working with different business groups, like trade organizations, to get them on board with the European Green Deal? And my question is sort of in the context of, in the United States, it's a real problem to get electrical utility companies, car companies, airlines, companies like that to buy into ambitious climate targets. So I'm wondering how the European Union is addressing that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Of course, it's not a walk in the park, as we say. But, we have positioned it as a kind of systemic exercise, using all type of tricks that are available, let's say, to the European Union to accompany the transition. And it's also not a new issue for us. We have developed some of the tools already many years ago, such as the emission trading scheme I mentioned. That is a kind of an automatic, system that forces the industrial players to slowly but surely reduce their emissions, but also by creating a level playing field, because everybody has to obey to the same rules. And somehow, I mean, for those who are not in competition with, businesses from outside of Europe, it's less of a problem. Of course, you have some sectors that are more fragile, like the steel industry, cement industry, etc. That is, of course, consuming a lot of energy, and that is also dependent on, is also confronted with foreign competition. There it's more difficult, and we need to develop a policy of stick and carrots, as I said. We are currently reflecting on a kind of carbon adjustment mechanism, a carbon border adjustment mechanism, meaning thinking of a system that kind of taxes the carbon intensity of products that are imported into Europe in order to avoid like carbon leakage. That's what I explained, is that carbon leakage means that we kind of exporting our jobs to elsewhere. That's not what we want to do. So these are some of the things we are thinking about to compensate, let's say, our ambitious targets. But I think it's also fair to say that by using a wider range of tools, you can also bring people on board. I mean, one of the things that we are much more aware of today is the need for an industrial strategy to look at value chains and to see, guys, how can we, for instance, on batteries, that's an interesting example. Europe has a very strong car industry, and you know what, we want to basically destroy it, because we want to electrify our mobility system, and knowing that actually the players that are powerful when it comes to electric mobility are actually Asian players or Tesla. So that's why we actually brought all the stakeholders from throughout the battery value chain and the automotive industry together and discussed with them, guys, what can we do to help you? What are the weak points we have here in Europe? What are our strong points? And how can we, in an intelligent way, address some of these issues by investing in innovation, by supporting also financially some of the things that need to happen, and so on and so on. So, but it's a battle, and what's more, I think the battle will become increasingly difficult, because it's one thing to agree on ambitious targets, but as we all know, the devil is in the detail, and it's when we will discuss some of the more detailed regulatory measures that need to be put in place to get there, that you will see, some opposition, that you will see some hesitance. And so that's why it's this huge investment plan. And this brings me also to the recovery plans that are being designed. This huge investment plan, can help to bring also some of these industrial players on board, because they know that's the future. And ultimately, the last point I want to mention, we have cleverly positioned it in our narrative as a kind of competitive edge of Europe. I mean, if we would become the front runners in terms of technology, innovation, and so on, related to climate change, of course, this will be beneficial in the long run for our industry, for our jobs, and so on. So.
Great, thank you, Saeed. We now have a question from Noah. Noah, would you like to come on camera, please, and ask your couple of questions?
Of course. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative, and it's refreshing to see pro-climate policies coming out of governments. So I have two questions for you. One is, is there any resistance within EU politics to these Green Deal policies? If so, what do they look like? And then my second question has to do with the sustainable finance. So how can the EU promote sustainable finance in its neighbors and European financial hubs that are not part of the EU? For me, like Geneva, Zurich, and I guess now London come to mind. So what can the EU do to promote sustainable finance in these European but not EU hubs of finance?
Yeah, two good questions. First of all, of course, there is opposition. I mean, it's clear. I mean, there are people who fear change, and that's one of the more difficult things to address. So I mentioned it briefly when speaking about this tension between green and the social. Many people living in remote areas or in zones that have old industries, they fear for their future. And so that's why in the financing of the transition, we also have foreseen a number of funds dedicated to these areas to transform these and to bring in new development strategies. And there are many ways actually we try to do that. But ultimately, it will only succeed if we develop also bottom-up approaches together with these people, go through a process, discussing that that type of life as it is today will not be able to be sustained in the long term because of all kind of developments, and that we together need to find a new future and also finance it. And find the money for it. So that's the key point. And so, of course, politically, this translates into some opposition here and there. And again, as I said before, one thing is to agree on targets. Another thing is to implement it and to make it happen. And as I said, there is a kind of multitude of regulations that need to be changed, a multitude of innovation policies that need to be developed, and when it comes to details, I guess that more opposition is going to come, as we saw, of course, in the past, because many of these issues have been kind of addressed already in regulations. We have a lot of regulations in place to limit the emissions of cars, to limit the emissions of industry and so on. So this will come back very soon, because next year will be crucial, as I said, because we want to move from this -40% target to -55, which means that we need to accelerate things even further. Coming to sustainable finance, that's really interesting. As you know very well, it's a very complex system. It's a value chain with many players. It's about billions of euros. So we need to work here also with many different different instruments. There is no silver bullet. But what we are developing now is a strategy together with the sector. And by the way, an increasing number of players, including pension funds and so on, are committing themselves to shift their money. And once the clients, those who have the money, decide to shift the money, then those who need the money will also change. So that's one thing. But next to that, so there is a change in mindsets, but we need to accompany this. We need to support that. We need to push for it by, for instance, increasing the disclosure requirements of companies and projects when it comes to environmental, climate, social considerations, so that the risks associated by not being climate compatible becomes very visible and obvious. I think that's one thing. And for this, we will change the regulations in place in this regard. But we are also developing right now what we call a taxonomy. It's a kind of dictionary, a taxonomy of green activities. We do this with all kinds of experts from the financial sector, but also with environmental knowledge and academics. And ultimately, it will show the different shades of green, basically, and can be used as a reference by, for instance, rating agencies, using that same reference by those who develop financial instruments that are labeled green, that can refer also to this taxonomy, by policymakers that want to only subsidize those activities that are compatible with this taxonomy, and so on. So once this is in place, it can actually trigger a lot of different actions by many players from throughout the system, forcing basically the players to act more sustainably. And this is a very strong tool to avoid what we call greenwashing, because today you have many players who say they are green, who say they are sustainable, but all of them are using different measures or using different underlying measurements to come to this conclusion. And we need to make this a little bit more clear for the public and for the investors. I mean, these are a few examples. We have also labeling that is coming, green bonds that are supported and will also be defined more precisely, and so on. And by doing this, you create a big market that will also be interesting for players from outside the European Union, because they want to have access to European customers. But in order to have access to the European market, you will have to, become more sustainable. This also is the case for financial players. And as a matter of fact, we see that London, but also Zurich and others, are developing a lot of green finance instruments because they know that's the future. The final point I want to make is that also here, indeed, we need to use diplomatic tools in a way. We have created a international platform on sustainable finance, bringing together like-minded countries, Canada and others, also countries in Africa and so on, are on board, exchanging experiences with regard to sustainable and green finance, trying to kind of streamline their measures so that they become compatible. So there are many things that are ongoing. And we also know, of course, in the US, there is a lot of interest in this, maybe not at the federal level, but we know that many states and many cities and are using green bonds and developing all kind of tools in support of this. So I think we are like in a trend that goes the right direction.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great, thank you for your question, Noah, and of course your answer, Saeed. We have a question from Shireen. Shireen, would you like to come on and ask your question, please? There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Saeed. This was really, really very interesting, and just inspires me to think of all these things that I wish we could do here in the US, and I wish we had that top-down leadership. We have to do a lot more from the bottom up. But my question is really about, we need to act quickly and do these necessary green strategies, but a lot of our systems are so entrenched. So how do you break those links and not leave people, really in pain and resistance? And I'm thinking some examples are, many of our retirement plans are entrenched in fossil fuel industries, and there's going to be stranded assets around that. If they just dismantle that, take out the funding from there, that there has to be a transition plan, I'm assuming. And I don't know what that would be in those cases where our systems are so hugely entrenched around the fossil fuel industry. And of course, there will be lots of pushback on that. And then also, workers that need to get retrained from fossil fuel industries to renewable energy. And how are you have more control over that in the EU, obviously, but I'm just trying to think of best practices for that transitional, painful period that people are going to experience and initially resist. But even though the long-term future will be much better, what do you do in that in-between time, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, that's a challenge. We need to explain that the sooner we start adapting, the better and the cheaper it will be, because no action means more costs, and the cost will be huge if we do not act to address climate change and other issues. So we need to make this cost more visible. People need to see, if they don't change over 20-30 years, the bill will be much higher. If we do change now, there will be an investment necessary. We need to invest, we need to find money to do it. But ultimately we will gain. And so, of course, we need to try to develop this narrative and make it concrete for each individual or for a community, and develop a kind of tailor-made approach for a community or a region to make the transition happen. And in Europe, I mean, of course, as I said, we need a multi-level approach. So you will have, a number of instruments that are designed at EU level and that create a framework, the broader picture that offers, a toolbox of instruments that can be used. But the member states and the communities, the cities need to be on board as well, and the trade unions and the businesses. So probably what you need to do is, at the level of a community, to really start a process, a conversation with all the actors to be involved. I mean, I'm living in Leuven, and we have created a nice platform with the city, with the local businesses, with civil society, with the university, and with everybody who wants to contribute. And we have now a team of 10 people in place that has already developed, let's say, the long-term plans. And we know what we need to do, and now we need to shift from planning to action and find resources. And we can find the resources at different levels. But it is not only about co-creating the solutions, but by bringing all these people together, you get to know each other, and you suddenly come up with new ideas, and you start developing new businesses that are compatible with your long-term future. And it's basically a renovation also of democracy, if you want, because we will need to find a new way to bring people on board, and the only good way is to really have them co-creating the solutions, because we cannot at the European level do it for everybody, and the same applies to the plans with regard to retraining people, etc. This needs to be addressed at a more local level, and at the European level, big funds need to be made available. That's actually what we do. We are designing also, there's also kind of a solidarity mechanism in place. Huh? So for those regions that are lagging behind, or that, we know that will be affected, like coal mine regions or energy intensive regions, you know that they will have to close their mines in 20 years. Okay, you start today discussing already what will be their new future, and Europe foresees money from rich regions towards these poorer regions to help them out. And you mentioned the retirement plans, etc. This is about the pension funds. I mentioned it already when speaking about sustainable finance. I think gradually they need to reinvest. They need to slowly put their money out of oil business and find other type of investments that has a return that is decent. Because basically, I think that's another message I want to convey. What we need to explain more and more is that it's a business case. It's a business case to invest in the technology of tomorrow. Many of these issues are actually already, have a decent return on investment. Things that, let's say, 10 years ago were very expensive, for instance, renewable energy, today is very cheap because the cost of technology has decreased a lot. And this will force out of the markets the more polluting solutions almost automatically. So if you are an investor, you see this happening, you're going to switch your money. Yeah? But I agree, Shireen, it's complex. So I have no wonder solution, but it will be a hell of a challenge.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I think our problem is we have a lot of people who are in control of the banks and the money that are tied so heavily to the fossil fuel industry and want to soak up every last dollar they can make in that before they're actually investing in renewable energy. They see the writing on the wall, but they don't want to give it up until.
Yeah, but there, of course, I think the Fed, for instance, the central banks have also a role to play. First of all, by ensuring that climate risks are made visible. So you need to change the regulations to ensure that all companies disclose their climate risks. And you may have oil companies that are gradually shifting. You may have like energy companies that were 100% oil a few years ago that are today maybe also investing in renewables. They are shifting, and you need to be able to make the distinction between that oil company A that is still a 100% oil company and another company that is already doing the transition. And you can also as a central bank, as the Fed, for instance, address this issue through the capital requirements. You can say, guys, if you have long-term risks in your portfolio, in your activities, you will have to pay more to get access to capital. You will pay higher interest rates. There are all type of little and bigger tools that are at the disposal of all kind of authorities supervising banks, financial institutions, and others. So again, it's a multitude of things that will need to happen. But of course, you need the political will. And I know in America and the US, it's it may depend on the outcome of the elections, what will happen in the next few years. But there is a big role for policymakers to steer this, to help to accompany this in the right direction. That's for sure. It's also about choices. Huh?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saeed. So I don't see any more questions in our chat area. However, I would like to open up the floor then for your final comments. Any concluding comments that you'd like to make before we end our wonderful event today?
Well, thank you, Felicia. I think I've said what I wanted to say, but I just want to emphasize that those who want to get my presentation, they can have it. I mean, you can organize yourself, I guess.
Right.
Yes. It's a pleasure. And if you have any questions afterwards, don't hesitate to contact me. You can find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me with a lot of. It would be a pleasure to do that. So yeah, that is it.
Great, great. Well, just to let everybody know, this event will be posted. A recording of this event will be posted along with the slides at our website. at the University of Colorado centers, the Colorado European Union Center of Excellence. So Saeed, this was an excellent presentation today. Thank you so very much for your willingness to do this. Today's event was the European Green Deal, Europe's new growth strategy. Thank you to Saeed El Khadraoui. That's terrible, but that's close, maybe closer.
It's very, very good. Excellent. Thank you very much, Felicia.
Thank you. Former member of the European Parliament and founder of Impact Lab. Our thanks to our sister centers of excellence across the nation for their support under the banner of the Jean Monnet Centers of Excellence. Today's event has been hosted by the Colorado European Union Center of Excellence at the University of Boulder. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us for our next virtual event on November 18th with Mercedes Garcia Perez, who is the head of global issues and innovations at the delegation of the European Union to the United States. Dr. Dagmara Koska, who is also at the delegation. She's a counselor for climate change, climate and energy, pardon me, and Irina Markina, senior energy advisor, along with our moderator, KK Duvivier, professor of law from Sturm College of Law at the University of Denver. And that event or that talk will be the EU's COVID recovery plan solution for a worldwide just energy transition. Again, thank you so much, Saeed, and we will be in touch.
Excellent. Bye-bye.